They chainsawed our fence like it was garbage on the curb. I was still half asleep, hair sticking out in every direction, when I saw them. 3 men in matching polos acting like they owned the street. Wood chips flew everywhere while a clipboard-wielding supervisor barked orders. No warning, no paperwork, just pure audacity at 8 a.m. My stomach sank. This wasn't a simple neighborhood dispute. Something darker was going on, like they were performing for a camera or testing how far they could push us. Would you have stepped outside or just called the cops? Let me know in the comments. I had been grading papers on American history when the chainsaw roared to life outside my window. 8 a.m. sharp on a Tuesday, and someone was attacking our gate with power tools. I'm Daniel Martin, 28, a high school history teacher, living with my grandpa Walter on land our family has owned since the 1970s. The wooden gate he built in 1983 had survived decades of storms, but apparently it couldn't withstand whatever was happening now. I dropped my red pen and rushed to the front door, still wearing yesterday's coffee-stained shirt, wondering what kind of emergency justified destroying someone's fence before most people had even finished their first cup of coffee. In hindsight, I should have known, real authorities don't arrive at dawn with chainsaws. 3 men stood at our gate, all wearing polo shirts embroidered with HOA Patrol. The biggest man operated the chainsaw, sending wood chips flying, while a clipboard-wielding manager barked instructions. The youngest, maybe 22, had a GoPro strapped to his shoulder, filming the chaos like it was some reality show. None of them looked like they belonged in our quiet neighborhood, or like they had any right to cut down our fence. Seriously, who shows up at dawn with power tools and no explanation? The scene was surreal, as if I had walked into someone else's nightmare. Stop! What are you doing? I shouted over the roar of the chainsaw. Where's your security license? Are you bonded? The clipboard manager turned toward me with a smug look, as if I were interrupting his important work. We don't need licenses for community enforcement, he said, not bothering to show any identification. Alarm bells went off in my head. Real security companies carry badges, licenses, insurance paperwork. These guys had nothing but polos and attitude. The chainsaw drowned out my thoughts, but one thing was crystal clear. Authorized personnel don't destroy fences first and explain later. I wish I could say I stayed calm, but who could? Show me the violation notice. I demanded, checking our mailbox. Empty. No warnings, no letters, no documentation of any kind. You skipped every legal step, I said. The clipboard manager laughed. We don't need paperwork for safety violations, he replied, gesturing at our perfectly maintained fence. Safety violations. I had been teaching American history for 6 years, and I knew the basics. You can't just destroy someone's property because you feel like it. There's due process, written notices, appeals, procedures. These men acted like the Constitution was optional. Maybe I should have walked away. I don't know. But their blatant disregard for basic rights made my blood boil. I demanded permits while they threatened to call the police for obstruction. Can you believe it? They were destroying my family's fence with power tools, and I was the one being accused of obstruction. The absurdity hit me like a slap. One phone call and my 82-year-old grandpa could have been painted as a troublemaker for defending his own land. That's when I realized this wasn't standard HOA enforcement. Real associations follow rules, file paperwork, and respect basic rights. These men were operating outside the system, hiding behind official-sounding titles. But they had picked the wrong family to intimidate. The chainsaw operator finished cutting through the gate's main support beam. Our beautiful wooden fence crashed to the ground with a thunderous crack, echoing through the neighborhood. 40 years of craftsmanship destroyed in 3 minutes by people who couldn't even show a business license. Watching it fall, something inside me broke. Not just anger, but grief for something irreplaceable. At that exact moment, Walter stepped onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, eyes sharp from years of experience, including combat at Kaysen. He didn't speak. He set down his cup and walked straight to the shed. I heard the scraping of metal across concrete, and I knew exactly what he was retrieving. When he emerged, he carried the belt-fed M60 machine gun he had brought home from Vietnam, complete with tripod and ammunition belt. The 3 faux patrol members went pale as he set it up on the porch table. The morning sun glinting off the barrel. Just having coffee on my own land, he said quietly, settling into his chair like nothing was unusual. The silence that followed felt electric. No chainsaw. No shouting. Just three men staring at a weapon they had only seen in movies. Walter sipped his coffee as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The power dynamic had shifted completely in 30 seconds. Mrs. Patterson across the street was filming with her phone, probably posting to that neighborhood watch page she was always talking about. The kid with the GoPro hadn't turned off his camera, still recording everything as his colleagues packed up. I noticed their uniforms had no official badges or identification numbers, just generic embroidery that could have been printed at any strip mall. Were these men even real security personnel, or just thieves in costume? The clipboard manager began backing toward their truck, suddenly eager to leave. "We'll be back with proper authorities," he said, trying, and failing, to sound intimidating. Walter just nodded, taking another sip of coffee. "Looking forward to meeting some real authorities," he replied. I had to stop and stare at him after that. The three men packed up faster than I'd ever seen, tossing the chainsaw into their truck bed and driving off without another word. But something about the way they kept glancing back suggested this wasn't over. I stood there in the morning silence, staring at our destroyed gate and wondering what we'd gotten ourselves into. Walter finished his coffee and began examining the damage, running his fingers along the cut wood as if assessing battlefield casualties. "Daniel," he said finally, "real authorities would have brought paperwork. These boys came here to steal something." Steal something. I looked at our modest home and couldn't imagine what anyone would want to take. I didn't know if this was just amateur hour or part of a bigger plan. It turned out the kid with the GoPro, Chase, had been live-streaming the whole ordeal to his social media account, hoping to gain viral followers. Instead, he captured the most explosive neighborhood confrontation anyone had seen in years. Mrs. Patterson's phone footage merged with Chase's high-quality video, creating a perfect storm of internet drama that spread faster than I could track. Within 3 hours, the clips had tens of thousands of views, and climbing. I wasn't sure what I expected from social media, but this wasn't it. Maybe I should have guessed that an 82-year-old Vietnam veteran confronting fake security with a belt-fed machine gun would capture attention like wildfire. The edited versions made Walter look far more dangerous than he really was, cutting out the fact that he never pointed the weapon at anyone or issued threats. Public opinion split like a political debate. Half the comments called him a dangerous old man with a weapon. The other half defended him, insisting the fake security patrol had no right to destroy our fence. One particularly nasty comment read, "You and that crazy old man will pay for this." My chest tightened with fury. Crazy old man. This was a man who had served his country in combat, while these keyboard warriors probably hadn't faced anything more dangerous than a traffic ticket. But that's the internet. Everyone is an expert on situations they've never experienced. Some threats felt genuinely scary. My email inbox flooded with messages, reporters requesting interviews, curious onlookers, and unfortunately, threatening notes from strangers with strong opinions about guns and self-defense. News vans appeared on our street like ants at a picnic, satellite dishes and camera crews turning our quiet neighborhood into a media circus that belonged on television, not in real life. I wasn't prepared for this level of attention, and frankly, it scared me more than the fake security patrol ever had. Walter stayed calm. "Daniel," he said, "they are running scared now. We need to be patient." Patient. With reporters knocking on our door every hour and neighbors complaining about the media circus disrupting their routines, I wasn't sure how much patience I had left. That's when I started researching HOA procedures online. Knowledge felt better than confusion in this rapidly escalating situation. What I found made my stomach drop and my hands shake with anger. Real homeowner associations must provide 30-day written notice before any enforcement action, followed by appeals hearings and court orders for seizure. None of these requirements had been followed in our case. No violation notices existed in municipal records. No hearings were scheduled. No documentation anywhere. Either our HOA was grossly incompetent, or something else entirely was happening, unrelated to standard community governance. I began printing state regulations and building a case file as if preparing for trial. Maybe I was overreacting, but fake security destroying fences felt like a fight worth taking with every tool available. Meanwhile, the HOA office held an emergency meeting as phones rang constantly with media requests and angry residents demanding answers. Deborah Richardson, the HOA president with her perfectly styled blonde bob, appeared for the first time since the chaos began. Her face was red with fury over the negative publicity. She looked exactly like every HOA president I'd imagined, armed with clipboards, regulations, and a burning desire to control other people's yards. Chase was pressured to delete his original video, but it was too late. The clips had already been mirrored and shared across multiple platforms, creating a permanent record of their questionable behavior. No amount of corporate spin could erase it. Technology works both ways, apparently, and sometimes it favors regular people over institutions. Then I discovered something that made it clear this wasn't amateur hour. Chase had secretly saved the longer, unedited video showing the patrol discussing their strategy before cutting our fence. They hadn't just acted recklessly, they had planned it. The footage contained clear dialogue about handling resistance from homeowners and avoiding complications, almost like seasoned thieves planning a heist. I'm not a lawyer, but even I could recognize scheming when it was recorded in high-definition video. They weren't confused about procedures or making honest mistakes. They were deliberately violating our rights, planning the whole operation in advance with full knowledge of how questionable it was. The question was why, and who was really behind this fake enforcement scheme that seemed too sophisticated for ordinary neighborhood bullying. I spent hours watching Chase's footage frame by frame, searching for clues about their true motives. Their truck bore no company logos, their shirts were generic, and their equipment looked rented rather than professionally owned. Everything about the operation suggested temporary actors playing roles rather than legitimate security personnel. Walter joined me at the computer, studying the footage with the same intensity he likely used analyzing enemy movements in Vietnam. "Daniel," he said after watching the recording 3 times, "these boys are working for someone else. The question is who, and what do they really want from our fence?" Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. National news outlets picked up the story, adding political spin to the footage. Some portrayed Walter as a dangerous vigilante, others as a patriotic defender of individual rights. I watched our quiet family dispute transform into a national debate about self-defense, gun ownership, and the limits of community authority. Chase's conspiracy footage hadn't been released yet, but I felt it burning like a secret weapon in our arsenal. When the time was right, it would expose the real schemers behind this elaborate plan. First, though, we had to figure out who was pulling the strings and why they wanted our fence destroyed badly enough to risk fraud or conspiracy charges. 2 days after the chainsaw incident, they returned. But this time was different. No power tools, no early morning ambush. Deborah Richardson herself led a group of official-looking people in black suits down our driveway like a corporate funeral procession. I watched them from the kitchen window while making breakfast, stomach twisting with anxiety at the thought of what fresh chaos they might have planned. Walter sat at the table, reading his newspaper, seemingly unbothered, though I noticed his coffee cup tremble slightly. Even combat veterans get nervous when the enemy changes tactics, I guessed. I wasn't sure whether we should call the police preemptively or wait to see what authority they claimed this time. Deborah knocked on our front door with the confidence of someone convinced she had every right to be there, flanked by 2 men who looked like they had stepped straight out of a government building. She wore a crisp business suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly salary, projecting an air of official authority that the Polo Shade Patrol had completely lacked. "Mr. Martin," she said when I answered the door, "we need to discuss the immediate surrender of that unregistered weapon your grandfather displayed during yesterday's incident." Unregistered weapon. I felt my face flush with anger but tried to keep my voice steady. That's a legally owned war relic. My grandfather has all the proper documentation, and it never left his private land. Walter appeared behind me before I could say anything else that might escalate the situation. "War relic, legally owned, staying on private land," he said calmly, his tone carrying more authority than all of Deborah's corporate posturing. Deborah straightened her shoulders and pulled a folder from her briefcase, as if preparing to serve us with official papers. "We have the authority to confiscate dangerous items that pose a threat to community safety," she announced, though something in her voice betrayed uncertainty. I turned to the men flanking her, searching for badges or identification that would lend weight to her claims. "Show me your law enforcement credentials," I said, my teacher instincts kicking in. "Show me a warrant." The silence that followed spoke volumes. No badges appeared. No documents were produced, just uncomfortable shuffling and exchange glances. At that point, I started laughing, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had reached an almost surreal level. "You people don't have any authority at all, do you?" I said, and the look on Deborah's face confirmed my suspicion. Walter invited them to sit on our porch furniture, maintaining polite southern hospitality while making it clear his weapon would remain where it was. "You have no badge, no warrant, no standing," he said matter-of-factly. "This is still private land in the United States of America." After they left empty-handed and obviously frustrated, I decided to dig deeper into what was really happening in our community. That afternoon, a visit to City Hall turned into an education on how far schemers will go to a pay official when planning something big. A clerk named Janet, who had worked there for 20 years, pulled up records that made my blood run cold. "HOA Patrol isn't a licensed security company," she explained, typing into her computer. "In fact, there's no business registration for that name anywhere in our county database. They have no standing in our community at all, just as you suspected. If they weren't authorized security, then what were they? And why were they so determined to remove our fence?" The answer arrived in an anonymous text message while I was driving home from City Hall. "Check Pinnacle development permits. Follow the money." My hands shook as I read it, realizing the conspiracy extended far beyond neighborhood disputes or HOA power trips. I pulled into a parking lot and began searching public records on my phone, following a digital trail that led to disturbing discoveries. Pinnacle Development had filed building permits for a massive project called the Sunset Ridge Development, which required widening the road directly past our home. Their construction plans called for clearing obstacles along the roadway, including anything that might impede heavy machinery. Our fence gate sat exactly where their construction plans marked a bottleneck. Suddenly, everything made sense, and in the most infuriating way possible. This wasn't standard HOA enforcement. It was a corporate land grab disguised as community authority. I sat in my car, reviewing permit applications and construction blueprints, stomach sinking as the pattern became undeniable. Multiple homes along the proposed route had been targeted by the same fake patrol, all conveniently located where Pinnacle needed clear access for construction equipment. We weren't dealing with overzealous neighbors. We were facing organized fraud designed to strip families of their rights for corporate profit. The audacity and careful planning of the scheme were breathtaking. Pinnacle had created an entire fake enforcement operation, complete with uniforms and official-sounding titles, to circumvent acquisition processes that would have cost millions in purchases or court proceedings. Rather than follow eminent domain laws or negotiate fair compensation, they decided to steal what they needed through intimidation and false authority. Driving home, my mind raced. How many families had already been victimized? How long had this been operating under the radar of real law enforcement? Walter was on the porch when I arrived, still keeping watch with his coffee and his constitutional deterrent. Now I understood why his military instincts had been triggered so strongly. "Grandpa," I said, showing him the permit documents on my phone. "It's not about our fence. It's corporate theft disguised as community enforcement." He studied the construction plans with the same careful attention he had once given enemy troop movements in Vietnam, nodding slowly as the pattern became clear. "These people aren't confused or overzealous," he said finally. "They are professional thieves using fake badges to steal land rights. That changes everything about how we need to respond to their next move." "Pinnacle Development," I whispered, wondering if we could fight corporate fraud this large and organized. That evening, Walter called me to sit at the kitchen table while he cleaned his M60, a ritual of weapon maintenance that served as both practical necessity and meditation on the challenges ahead. I had never seen him handle the machine gun with such deliberate care, checking every component as though preparing for actual combat rather than deterring fake security personnel. The belt-fed mechanism gleamed under the kitchen lights, a relic from a war fought for principles that suddenly felt painfully relevant. "Daniel," he said without looking up from his work, "we need to talk about fighting thieves who hide behind fake badges. This isn't the same as dealing with honest people who disagree with us." I wanted to hire a lawyer immediately, convinced attorneys were our best defense against corporate fraud this sophisticated and well-organized. "We need to do this through the courts," I insisted. But Walter shook his head with the patience of someone who had seen enough combat to know when conventional rules no longer applied. Law works when both sides follow it, he explained, running a cleaning rod through the barrel. These people are thieves operating outside boundaries. Lawyers filing paperwork in courtrooms they don't respect aren't going to stop them. His words made me uncomfortable. They suggested a level of conflict I wasn't prepared for, but I couldn't argue with his logic. How do you fight fraud when the schemers refuse to acknowledge authority? Walter told me about enemy tactics in Vietnam, fake uniforms, psychological tricks designed to make soldiers doubt themselves while attackers advance through deception. The parallel to our situation was unmistakable and deeply unsettling. This gun represents what I fought for, he continued. The right to defend your land when thieves refuse to respect boundaries. While he cleaned methodically, I spread documents across the table, building permits, land purchase records, zoning applications, all bearing signatures that made my hands shake as I connected the dots. These weren't random acts of harassment. They were calculated moves in a corporate land grab that had been planned for months. I discovered pinnacle development permits dating back 6 months, applications for road widening that required removing structural obstacles along our street. The signatures on multiple documents linked city officials to the development company in ways that suggested bribery, or worse. My fingers trembled as I traced the boundaries on the permit maps, realizing that our fence gate sat exactly where Pinnacle needed clear access for construction equipment. "Walter," I said, voice cracking, "look at this. They've been planning to take our land since before the first chainsaw showed up." The documentation was overwhelming and terrifying, evidence of organized conspiracy. We developed a 3-step counter-strategy that combined Walter's military experience with my research skills and access to modern communication technology. First, we would document every step of rebuilding our fence gate, creating an unbreakable paper trail that would expose any future interference as theft. Walter added tactical wisdom about backup plans and escape routes in case the thieves escalated to violence. Second, I would create an online group to collect testimonies from other victims of the fake HOA patrol, building a database of harassment that law enforcement couldn't ignore. Third, we would install security cameras throughout our home to capture any future attacks, creating a digital fortress that protected us in every way. My research into the HOA patrol revealed exactly what I suspected. Nothing authorized about their operations. No state registration, no insurance bonds, no business licenses, no tax records, nothing to indicate legitimate employment or corporate structure. They existed solely as costumes and confidence tricks, a theater production designed to intimidate homeowners into surrendering their rights without challenge. I spent hours documenting their fake credentials, building a case file that could demolish their authority claims in any courtroom. But the question remained, would we even get the chance to present our testimony in court? Or had Pinnacle Development already secured judges and officials on their payroll, just as they had fake security personnel? The online group I created grew rapidly as word spread about our confrontation and the larger conspiracy we'd uncovered. Neighbors shared stories of similar harassment, all following identical patterns. Homeowners targeted for fake violations that coincidentally aligned with Pinnacle's construction needs. Multiple families reported the same fake patrol demanding compliance with non-existent regulations, always focusing on structures that would impede corporate development plans. The testimonies were overwhelming, clearly evidence of a systematic fraud operation targeting anyone whose rights conflicted with corporate profit. I felt both vindicated and horrified by the scope of victimization occurring under our noses. Real backup finally arrived when I contacted an attorney specializing in land rights and fraud cases. Sarah Collins, a sharp and formidable woman, took one look at our documentation and immediately grasped the conspiracy we faced. She confirmed our legal standing and advised us to document every interaction with the fake patrol, building an airtight case for prosecution and civil damages. This level of organized fraud often involves RICO violations, she explained, which means federal charges and serious prison time for everyone involved. The prospect of actual consequences for our tormentors felt like the first good news I'd heard since this nightmare began. But I knew Pinnacle Development wouldn't surrender quietly when faced with federal prosecution. The fake patrol ramped up their surveillance over the week, taking photos of our home and measuring distances as if preparing for another assault on our rebuilt gate. Neighbors reported seeing the same official-looking vehicles cruising through the area at different times, clearly gathering intelligence for their next move. Walter and I took turns monitoring, documenting license plates and faces for our growing file. The tension felt like a siege, two sides preparing for a confrontation that could decide whether corporate thieves could steal American land rights through intimidation and fraud. I found myself obsessively checking security cameras, knowing that our next encounter would likely determine the outcome of this entire conflict. Walter spent extra time each morning cleaning and maintaining his weapon, not as preparation for violence, but a psychological warfare against anyone watching our home. The rituals served multiple purposes, demonstrating our readiness to defend our rights while producing footage of lawful behavior that would protect us in court. "They're watching us through binoculars from that blue sedan," he observed during one evening strategy session, pointing to a vehicle parked 3 blocks away. Was I overreacting, or was this a setup decades in the making? The permit maps showed our fence line marked in red ink, a target selected long before any fake patrol appeared. Every document I examined revealed another layer of premeditated conspiracy. The following week, Deborah organized what she called an official compliance inspection, bringing equipment that looked professional enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. I immediately began live streaming on the community group I'd created as soon as their vehicles pulled into our driveway, heart racing as 3,000 viewers joined in real time. Deborah and her associates unloaded clipboards, measuring tools, and what appeared to be official documentation from their black SUV. Everything about their presentation screamed legitimacy, from pressed uniforms to confident body language. But Walter and I knew better. These people were actors performing for an audience that included law enforcement, media outlets, and thousands of potential witnesses to whatever scheme they planned next. Deborah announced her demands as though reading from a rulebook, her voice carrying the authority of someone who genuinely believed she had the right to dictate terms on our private land. "Surrender that dangerous weapon per Community Safety Code Section 12-7, she declared, pulling out folders that looked official enough to pass a casual inspection. Walter kept his constitutional deterrent clearly visible on the table while producing papers from the Veterans Administration proving his lawful ownership beyond any reasonable doubt. "I have authorization for this war relic," he said steadily, his voice carrying quiet confidence without the need for badges or warrants that we had already established didn't exist. The live stream chat exploded as viewers recognized the absence of any real authority in Deborah's demands. Comments like "fake cops destroying fences" scrolled faster than I could read, mixed with advice from people clearly versed in the law, far more than our would-be oppressors. Mrs. Patterson appeared from across the street, finally speaking up after days of silent observation. "These people don't represent our neighborhood," she announced loudly enough for the microphone to capture. I had to stop and stare at her transformation, from quiet observer to vocal defender of individual rights. Multiple neighbors emerged from their homes, forming an impromptu gathering that surrounded Deborah's group with genuine residents who'd never voted for any HOA patrol enforcement. The power dynamic shifted completely as real community members faced down the corporate actors. The critical moment came when one of Deborah's associates bent down to retrieve a pen he dropped, and a folder slipped from his hands, scattering papers across our porch. For just a split second before he could gather them, a bright corporate logo flashed clearly on camera. "Wait," I called out to the live stream audience, zooming in on the scattered documents. "Did everyone see that Pinnacle Development logo right there on their paperwork?" I called out to the live stream audience. The chat went wild. Thousands of viewers were screenshotting the footage, sharing it across multiple platforms before Deborah's group could react. The visual proof was undeniable and perfectly timed, caught live on camera, with thousands of witnesses documenting corporate fraud in real time. Deborah's face went white as the reality sank in. Her confident authority crumbled into obvious panic while she scrambled to help her associate collect the scattered papers. The neighbors gathered around our porch began pointing and filming with their phones, shouting, "We see the proof. Corporate thieves exposed." Meanwhile, the live stream exploded with comments about the connection between fake enforcement and Pinnacle Development's corruption. Neighbors who had remained silent during previous confrontations suddenly found their voices, demanding answers about why the company was using fake authority to intimidate residents. The crowd grew larger and louder as word spread that the conspiracy had been publicly exposed with undeniable evidence. When Deborah ordered her associates to confiscate Walter's weapon, the live stream audience and neighborhood witnesses created a minefield the fake patrol couldn't ignore. Walter stood his ground with quiet dignity, pointing out that theft would constitute a felony under state law, regardless of any claimed authority. That would be armed robbery under state code, he said matter-of-factly. And we have 3,000 witnesses watching this conversation. Nobody dared commit televised felonies while thousands of people documented faces and license plates for law enforcement. Chase, one of Deborah's associates, stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating chaos. "Deborah, we should leave now," he said quietly. But she snapped back, desperation in her voice. "Shut up. We have authorization." The Pinnacle Development logo on the scattered papers had already answered that question for everyone watching. The community solidarity emerging in that moment felt like something straight out of American history, neighbors defending neighbors against fraudulent authority. I gained confidence from the overwhelming support, realizing that truth and evidence were far more powerful than intimidation and fake badges. Multiple neighbors shared their own harassment stories on camera, creating a public record of systematic abuse that law enforcement couldn't ignore. Mrs. Patterson revealed she had been documenting the fake patrol's activities for weeks, logging vehicles, faces, and demands. "I knew they weren't authorized," she said, "but I didn't know how to fight them until you two showed me resistance was possible." A sheriff's deputy arrived mid-confrontation, quickly reviewing the situation. He confirmed Walter's right to possess his war relic while noting the complete absence of credentials among Deborah's group. Examining Walter's Veterans Administration paperwork, he confirmed the weapon's legal status and noted the corporate connection exposed on the live stream. "What is your relationship with Pinnacle Development?" he asked Deborah directly. Her stammering response provided all the evidence needed for potential charges. The fake patrol had no authority whatsoever, just costumes and corporate backing that had finally been exposed under official scrutiny. Chase approached Walter amidst the chaos, separating himself from the others. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was wrong," he said quietly. Walter nodded with the calm wisdom of someone who had seen young men make bad choices in wartime. "You're learning, son. Choose better employers next time." The retreat that followed was exactly what it appeared to be, thieves fleeing exposure and potential prosecution after their fraud scheme collapsed under community resistance. Deborah's group hastily packed their equipment, no longer projecting authority or confidence, just desperation to escape before facing serious consequences. The live stream viewers celebrated in real time, sharing screenshots of the Pinnacle Development logo across multiple platforms to document corporate fraud for posterity. But as they reached their vehicle, Deborah turned back, her eyes colder than before. "We'll be back with real authorities," she warned. There was something different in her gaze now, more dangerous than desperation. The way Deborah stared at our house suggested that this humiliation had transformed her from corporate tool into personal enemy. Now exposed as frauds on camera, I knew desperate thieves don't simply give up quietly. Friday night, exactly 2 a.m., the motion sensors across our yard triggered simultaneously, bathing the entire area in LED security lights that turned darkness into daylight. I jolted awake from deep sleep, heart pounding, as the automated security system activated according to our carefully planned defensive protocol. Walter and I had anticipated this escalation after their public humiliation during the live stream, expecting desperate thieves to attempt covert destruction when they thought nobody was watching. The professional lock-cutting tools they brought indicated this was no longer amateur hour. This was a coordinated assault designed to eliminate witnesses and destroy structures that had become symbols of resistance to their corporate fraud scheme. I grabbed my phone and started live streaming immediately, knowing documentation would be our strongest weapon. "Surprise! You're on camera!" I shouted into the night, my voice carrying across the illuminated yard as hundreds of viewers joined the broadcast within seconds. The three figures caught in our security lights froze, like deer in headlights. Their professional equipment and coordinated movements revealed a level of sophistication far beyond typical neighborhood disputes. They had brought battery-powered saws, lockpicks, and what looked like commercial demolition tools, clearly planning to destroy our rebuilt fence gate and potentially damage our house to erase evidence of previous attacks. The fence collapsed exactly as Walter had designed it, producing dramatic footage without seriously injuring anyone, providing perfect documentation of trespass and destruction. The crash echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot, waking residents who quickly joined the live stream as witnesses to corporate-sponsored vandalism. Walter emerged from the house carrying an American flag in one hand, his M60 machine gun clearly visible behind him on the porch table, an iconic image that burned itself into every viewer's memory. He stood like a soldier protecting rights from domestic enemies, projecting authority and dignity that contrasted sharply with the thieves caught destroying private property. "Gentlemen, you are committing felonies at 2 a.m. on private land," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of military service and an oath to defend the Constitution. The live stream viewers exploded with patriotic support, sharing the broadcast across social media faster than any professional marketing campaign could. Comments poured in, lauding Walter's defense of American land rights, turning our midnight confrontation into a national symbol of resistance against corporate tyranny and fraud. The peak viral moment occurred when one intruder swore, and Walter corrected him with the discipline of combat experience. "Watch your language," he commanded. "Americans are watching this live stream, including children who deserve better examples of adult behavior." The viewer count climbed past 5,000, then 15,000, then 30,000. As the clip spread across multiple platforms, news outlets began requesting footage rights while the confrontation was still ongoing, recognizing a story that combined land rights, veteran heroism, and corporate theft into compelling, real-time drama. The thieves' faces were clearly visible under our security lights, leaving no doubt about their identities. The license plates documented the intruders' equipment left behind, serving as proof of premeditated felonies committed against American citizens on their own land. Amid the chaos, Chase separated himself from the others, approaching Walter with genuine remorse that seemed to cut through the older man's formidable military presence. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was wrong," he said quietly. Walter's response reflected the leadership qualities that had carried him through combat in Vietnam. "You're learning, son. Choose better employers," he replied, offering redemption to a young man who had made terrible choices but still possessed enough conscience to recognize right from wrong. This exchange humanized both men in front of thousands of viewers, demonstrating that justice could include mercy without compromising principles. Chase's transformation from accomplice to repentant witness would prove crucial in the proceedings that followed, providing insider testimony about the conspiracy that had targeted our community. The footage captured that night was overwhelming and irrefutable, multiple angles of trespass and destruction, all recorded in high-definition video that no lawyer could dismiss. License plates, faces, tools, and conversations, all meticulously documented, would serve as prosecution exhibits in federal court. The sheriff's deputy, responding to our emergency call, arrived to find intruders fleeing and material scattered across our yard like a crime scene from a television show. Walter and I secured the digital footage, immediately uploading copies to multiple cloud storage services to prevent any tampering or destruction. The case against Pinnacle Development and their accomplices was now ironclad, supported by live witness testimony from thousands of Americans who had watched the corporate fraud unfold in real time. Their retreat was exactly what it appeared to be: professional thieves fleeing exposure after their sophisticated operation collapsed under community resistance and documentation. They abandoned expensive equipment in their haste, providing additional proof of premeditated activity that prosecutors could use to enhance charges and seek maximum penalties. The live stream continued broadcasting their panicked departure, license plates clearly visible as they violated multiple traffic laws in desperation to evade arrest. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from national news outlets, offers from attorneys specializing in corporate fraud, and messages of support from Americans who recognized our confrontation as a defense of principles that applied to every landowner in the country. Walter sat back down at the porch table, the American flag draped behind him like a tableau from a Revolutionary War painting. His coffee cup remained steady in hands that had defended freedom in multiple conflicts. The M60 stayed visible but unthreatening, a symbol of rights rather than a weapon of war, representing the principles that distinguished authorized governance from fraud. "This is how Americans defend their land," he said to the live stream audience, relying on evidence and witnesses, not violence. The comment section erupted with patriotic support, veterans sharing their own experiences defending rights, and experts explaining the legal consequences awaiting anyone who used fraud and intimidation to steal American property. We had them caught in the act on camera committing felonies, and now the entire country was watching how it would end. The residents organized what they called a community testimony review at the site of our destroyed fence gate, transforming our front yard into an impromptu courtroom. Over 200 people from across the county attended, bringing folding tables, microphones, and a projection screen powered by portable generators, creating a setup that resembled a political rally more than a neighborhood gathering. Local media outlets covered the event as breaking news, recognizing that our fence dispute had grown into something far larger than corporate fraud. This was American citizens reclaiming their rights from thieves who had hidden behind fake authority for far too long. I felt simultaneously honored and terrified by the responsibility of representing everyone victimized by Pinnacle Development's systematic theft of land rights through intimidation and deception. Walter took the microphone with quiet dignity, his voice carrying across the crowd with authority earned through decades of military service. He gestured toward the destroyed gate that had become a symbol of corporate assault on individual liberty. "I built this fence to honor fallen comrades," he said simply. "That M60 represents what we fought for, land ownership rights." The crowd listened in respectful silence, understanding that they were witnessing living history from someone who had paid the price for the freedoms they were defending today. When he handed me the microphone, my throat felt raw under the gaze of more than 200 neighbors. I wasn't a soldier, I was just a teacher, and my voice trembled as I began explaining what we had discovered about the conspiracy targeting our community. Faces in the crowd reflected my own anger and determination, neighbors who had suffered in silence now finally seeing a path to justice. I presented our video documentation, methodically walking the community through recorded proof of organized scheming that would have impressed law school professors. My hands shook slightly as I advanced through the slides showing the midnight raid footage in crystal clear detail. The projection screen displayed professional intruders committing felonies against American citizens on their own land. I had to pause twice when my voice cracked with emotion. The sheriff's deputy, who had responded to our emergency calls, confirmed multiple violations of state and federal law, including trespass, destruction, and fraud under color of authority. A real city inspector appeared unexpectedly, announcing that our home had never violated any municipal codes and that all supposed violations had been fabricated by thieves impersonating government authority. Mrs. Patterson read the names of other victims who had been too frightened to speak publicly, creating a permanent record of systematic abuse that prosecutors could use to build RICO cases against everyone involved. The pattern of organized theft was undeniable when documented by multiple witnesses with corroborating testimonies. Each story revealed the same tactics, the same fake uniforms, and the same coordinated intimidation designed to break families' resistance to corporate land grabs. Have you ever wondered what you'd do if your entire community were being targeted by organized fraud? An HOA board member who had remained silent throughout the crisis arrived, carrying a small digital recorder that would change everything we thought we knew about the conspiracy. "I recorded everything," she announced to the stunned crowd. "People need to know the truth about what's been happening in our community." Her hands shook as she connected the device to the sound system, preparing to expose secrets that had been hidden from residents for months. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the tension in her voice suggested revelations that would shock even those of us who had been fighting the fraud from the beginning. She looked terrified but determined, like someone who had finally found the courage to speak truth to power after months of complicit silence. The audio recording that played through our speakers delivered the final, devastating proof of conspiracy, evidence that would seal the fate of everyone involved in the fraud scheme. Deborah's voice emerged clearly, discussing strategy with Pinnacle Development representatives like partners in organized theft. "These old people just grow gardens and collect Social Security," she said with obvious contempt. "They can't fight corporate lawyers or afford the expenses that real resistance would require." My chest tightened as disbelief washed over me. Someone could speak so dismissively about the citizens she had claimed to represent. The community gasped audibly at her callous attitude, and someone shouted, "Play it again." As the recording continued, it revealed even more damning details. The contempt in her voice was unmistakable, treating her neighbors like obstacles to be removed rather than people with rights. The Pinnacle representative responded with a casual tone of someone discussing routine business. "We're paying good money to clear these obstacles. Handle it however necessary. Just make sure there's no blowback that reaches our corporate offices." The crowd erupted in murmurs of outrage as the recording laid bare systematic bribery, fraud, and harassment planned at the highest levels of corporate management. Multiple homes have been targeted using the same fake authority scheme, with city planning officials also receiving payments to approve permits and ignore violations. The scope of corruption extended far beyond our case, encompassing a network of activity operating under the radar of real law enforcement. The casual, clinical tone of their conversation chilled me more than any threat could, revealing people who treated fraud as just another business tool. The recording continued, detailing other victims and strategies that made my stomach turn with rage and disgust. The conspiracy included plans to escalate harassment against families who resisted, including threats of violence and destruction far beyond what we had experienced. Elderly residents and military veterans had been specifically targeted, assumed less likely to fight back against fraudulent authority claims. Walter's military background and my teaching career had apparently surprised them, presenting resistance they had not anticipated based on their psychological profiling of potential victims. The enterprise had operated for over a year, successfully intimidating dozens of families into surrendering land rights without challenge. Most disturbing was the clinical discussion of which families would break first under pressure, treating human suffering as a business metric to be optimized. The district attorney arrived in the middle of the testimony presentation, accompanied by state investigators who had been building their own case against Pinnacle Development based on similar thefts in other counties. The recorded conversations provided the final proof needed for federal RICO charges, capable of dismantling the entire organization and sending everyone involved to prison for decades. This level of organized fraud constitutes a federal conspiracy, the DA announced to the crowd. We now have sufficient testimony to pursue maximum penalties under both state and federal law. Multiple victims came forward immediately, sharing stories of harassment and intimidation that followed identical patterns across different communities. The DA's presence transformed our neighborhood gathering into an official investigation, giving legal weight to testimonies that had been dismissed for months as isolated complaints. 2 weeks after the community testimony review exposed the conspiracy to national attention, real law enforcement delivered the justice American citizens deserved. Deborah Richardson pleaded guilty to multiple felonies, including conspiracy, fraud, and extortion, accepting a plea bargain that required $50,000 in restitution payments to victims and full cooperation with ongoing federal investigations. The fake patrol members faced trespass and destruction charges, resulting in prison sentences and permanent criminal records. Pinnacle Development executives confronted federal fraud charges that could bring decades of imprisonment and the complete destruction of their corporate empire built on systematic theft of American land rights. Our victory extended far beyond our fence dispute, establishing precedent to protect other families from similar corporate fraud schemes nationwide. Walter and I rebuilt our fence gate with the help of the community, neighbors volunteering their time and skills to create something stronger and more beautiful than what the thieves had destroyed. We installed permanent security cameras, not for surveillance, but for transparency, creating a digital record that would deter future attacks while documenting our lawful use of private land. A hand-carved wooden sign now marked the property. Private land protected, fake authority exposed, Constitution defended. It served as a permanent reminder that American citizens still possess the power to resist organized theft when they work together. Our neighborhood transformed through security measures implemented through proper channels rather than fraudulent enforcement schemes. Families organized genuine community watch programs that followed legal procedures and respected individual land rights while providing collective security against real threats. Chase found employment with a licensed security company operating according to proper standards, personally thanking Walter for the life lesson that had saved him from a path that could have destroyed his future. His transformation from accomplice to law-abiding citizen demonstrated that redemption is possible even after serious mistakes, provided someone has the courage to choose justice over continued scheming. Multiple families successfully filed civil lawsuits against the conspiracy, recovering damages for repair costs, expenses, and emotional distress caused by months of systematic harassment and intimidation. These victories provided both financial relief and established court precedents to protect other Americans from similar corporate fraud schemes. Our online community group evolved into a resource center, connecting victims of land rights violations across multiple states with attorneys specializing in constitutional law and corporate fraud. The digital network we created to fight our local battle became a permanent tool for defending American land rights against organized theft. Walter spent peaceful evenings on our rebuilt porch. The M60 rested alongside an American flag that flew over land he had successfully defended, not through violence, but through vigilance and principle. The weapon remained a symbol of principles, not war, representing the duty every American citizen bears to protect freedom through lawful resistance to tyranny. I watched him with profound respect, understanding now why his generation had been called to defend democracy against both foreign and domestic enemies. His military service had prepared him for this civilian battle, providing tactical knowledge and moral courage that made our victory possible. The emotional resolution of the conflict left lessons about defending rights that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I had learned that freedom requires active vigilance against those who would abuse authority for personal profit, whether they wear foreign uniforms or corporate suits. The Constitution protects citizens who possess the courage to stand up to fraud and intimidation, but only if they are willing to document testimony, build community support, and work within systems that still function when properly used. Our victory required both Walter's military wisdom and my civilian skills, demonstrating that effective resistance to tyranny combines multiple generations and different types of expertise. I posted a final video message to the 15,000 members who had joined our online community during the months of struggle, sharing lessons learned and encouraging others to defend their rights when faced with similar attacks. We learned that thieves can wear uniforms and claim authority, I explained to the camera. But in America, the Constitution protects citizens who stand up to fraud with testimony and resistance. The response from viewers across the country confirmed that our local battle had resonated with Americans facing similar threats to their land rights and individual liberty. Freedom required vigilance and occasional confrontation, but not violence when tools remained available to honest citizens. The final symbolic image of our victory captured everything: Walter sitting peacefully beside his constitutional deterrent, the rebuilt fence standing strong behind him, security cameras documenting the transparency and accountability that had replaced fear and intimidation. The M60 gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, properly maintained, a reminder of the price previous generations had paid for the freedoms we had successfully defended through civilian means. Our land had become a symbol of successful resistance to organized theft, proving that individual Americans can still defeat corporate fraud when testimony, community support, and law are combined to defend their rights. With Walter's words echoing in my mind, it felt as though the storm had finally broken, exposing thieves with testimony, not bullets. Because the truth is, the system only works when we force it to. Our land is still standing, our rights intact, and more importantly, our neighbors now realize they are not powerless. Fake authority only wins if we allow it.